They called her broken. They called her useless. The alien princess was born into royalty, yet cursed with a secret she could never give her people an heir. The king, her own father, turned his shame into punishment. To him, she was nothing more than a failed daughter, and so, in front of the galaxy, he gave her away, not to another royal house, not to a warrior lord, but to a human. The court laughed, the stars whispered, an infertile princess, gifted like an object to a weaker species, but no one, not even the king himself, could imagine what was about to happen next, because this human would not just keep the princess, he would give her something her world thought impossible, something that would shake the galaxy to its core. Asterisk the stars shone bright above the royal palace, but inside its walls lived a young princess who felt no light in her heart. She had grown up with eyes on her, whispers around her, and secrets that followed her every step. From the moment she was old enough to understand words, she knew she was different. The healers had told her family that she would never give birth to an heir. For a royal family, this was more than sad news. It was shame. It was a scar that could never be hidden. Her father, the king, was proud, strong, and feared across the galaxy. To him, a daughter who could not carry the royal bloodline forward was of no worth. The court hid their smiles when she walked past. The noble women whispered behind her back, and the royal advisors spoke of her in low voices, calling her empty. She tried to keep her head high, but every word cut deeper than the last. The princess had never asked to be born into royalty. She only wanted kindness, perhaps a little love, and maybe the chance to prove she was more than the whispers around her. But her father had no patience for such wishes. To him, every child was either an heir or a burden, and so, in a decision that shocked even his closest advisors, he gave her away. It was not to a great warrior, nor to another noble house, but to someone entirely unexpected, a human. The human had come to the court as part of a diplomatic exchange, a man from a planet that most aliens still considered weak and unworthy of respect. His people had no fleets to challenge empires, no ancient bloodlines to boast of, no crowns made of star metal. He was just one man, standing tall among beings who saw him as nothing, and yet, the king placed his daughter before him and declared, "She is yours, a gift from my house to yours." The court gasped. Some laughed. Others whispered in shock. The princess stood frozen, her eyes wide and her heart racing. To be given away like an object was humiliation beyond measure. She could not meet the human's eyes, for fear she would see pity in them. She had known shame before, but this was a new wound. She waited for him to reject her, to push her aside, as so many others had done. But the human did not laugh. He did not bow or thank the king as others might. Instead, he turned toward the princess, and in that single moment, something in his gaze was different. His eyes held no mockery, no judgment, only quiet recognition, as if he could see the pain she carried and still chose to look deeper. The princess felt a strange warmth in her chest, something she had not felt in years. It was not love, no, love could not appear so suddenly, but it was respect, and respect was something she had been denied for as long as she could remember. The days that followed were filled with silence. She traveled with the human, leaving the cold palace walls behind. She expected harsh words, commands, or indifference, but instead he gave her space. He spoke to her gently, asking nothing in return. He did not treat her as a gift, nor as a burden, but simply as someone walking beside him. At first, she did not know how to respond. She had been raised to believe her value was tied to her ability to give heirs. Without that, she believed herself worthless, but the human never once mentioned it. He spoke of stars, of the earth he had left behind, of music and oceans and skies, filled with colors she had never seen. Slowly, the princess found herself listening, then answering, then laughing quietly when he told her small jokes. Rumors spread across the galaxy. The king's infertile daughter was living with a human. Many mocked the story. Some pitied her. Others waited to see if the king would recall her in anger. But the princess did not think of the palace anymore. For the first time in her life, she felt like she was not being measured by what she could not do. Yet deep in her heart, questions began to rise. She felt strange changes in her body. soft signs that she could not explain. At night, when the stars hung silently above them, she touched her stomach and wondered if it was only her imagination. No healer would believe her. No court would listen. But something inside her whispered a different truth. And the human, though he said nothing, began to notice too. The princess did not yet know what destiny awaited her. She did not know that the gift her father had thrown away in shame would soon become the greatest miracle of their age. All she knew was that, for the first time, someone looked at her not as broken, but as whole, and that small change was enough to set fire to a story that would echo across the galaxy. The days passed slowly, yet each one carried a quiet change. The princess had once moved like a shadow, her steps heavy with shame, her voice soft enough to vanish in the air. Now, in the company of the human, her silence began to feel less like a prison and more like a place of safety. He never pressed her for words she did not wish to speak, but when she chose to share even the smallest thought, he listened as though it was a treasure. She noticed little things about him first. The way he rose early and watched the sunrise as if it was something sacred. The way he carried simple objects from his home world, an old book, a piece of carved stone, a small musical device that played gentle sounds she had never heard before. These were not gifts of power or wealth, yet they seemed to hold more value for him than all the jewels of her father's palace. When he spoke of earth, his words carried a warmth that wrapped around her, and she imagined oceans that moved endlessly, and skies that sang with color. In return, he asked about her world. Though she had never thought of her own life as worth describing, she spoke of the palace gardens where no one dared to laugh too loudly, the halls that echoed with voices more cruel than kind, and the way she often hid in quiet corners to escape the endless eyes upon her. He listened without judgment, and, when she finished, he simply said, "No one should feel invisible in their own home." His words lingered with her long after the conversation ended. It was in these small exchanges that trust began to form. Trust was something she had never given easily, not even to her own kin. Yet with him, it unfolded like a flower in sunlight, slowly but surely. She began to notice how often her eyes searched for him in a crowd, how her heart steadied when his voice reached her. She wondered if he knew, or if he was as careful with her heart as he was with his words. But alongside this quiet bond, something else stirred within her. There were moments when she woke in the night with a strange flutter in her chest, or when her body felt heavy in a way she could not explain. At first, she told herself it was only the strain of travel or the weight of her worries. Yet as days turned to weeks, the changes grew harder to dismiss. She kept these feelings hidden, pressing a hand to her stomach when no one watched, her mind racing with questions. The healers had been clear all her life. She was not capable of carrying life. Her father had believed them, the court had believed them, and in time, even she had believed them. Yet now, her body whispered a secret that no one else could hear. The human noticed her unease long before she spoke of it. He did not confront her, but his eyes lingered a little longer when she winced. His steps slowed to match hers when she grew tired, and his tone softened when he asked if she needed rest. She wanted to deny it, to pretend nothing was different. Yet his quiet care made the truth harder to hide. One evening, when the stars stretched across the sky like rivers of light, he sat beside her in silence. For a long while, neither spoke. Then, without turning his head, he said softly, "Something is changing, isn't it?" The words made her breath catch. She opened her mouth to deny it, but the look in his eyes was not one of suspicion, it was one of understanding. And so she lowered her gaze and whispered, "I do not know what it means." That night, sleep did not come easily. She thought of the laughter that would echo through the palace if they knew, the disbelief of the healers, the fury of her father. But then she thought of something else. What if it was true? What if the impossible had begun within her? The thought both terrified and filled her with a hope so fragile she hardly dared to touch it. The days that followed were filled with more questions than answers. She did not know what the future would bring. But she knew one thing with certainty: she was no longer walking her path alone. The human walked beside her, steady and unshaken, as though he had known from the beginning that her story was not finished. And in the quiet of her heart, The princess began to wonder if perhaps the galaxy had been wrong about her all along. Perhaps she was not empty. Perhaps she was meant to carry something far greater than her family could ever imagine. The whispers in her heart grew stronger with each passing day. At first, the princess thought she was imagining it. A faint tiredness, a warmth in her body, a rhythm deep inside her that felt unlike anything she had ever known. She remembered every word spoken by the healers of her childhood, their faces stern and cold as they told her father she would never bear an heir. Those words had shaped her life, chained her spirit, and branded her with shame. But now, in the quiet moments, her body spoke a different truth. She hid her secret at first. When she walked with the human, she kept her hands folded neatly, even though they longed to rest against her stomach. When he asked if she was well, she nodded quickly and turned the question away. Yet he was not blind. He had a way of noticing even the smallest changes, the way her steps slowed, the way her breath caught when she thought no one heard. One evening, as the sky burned in shades of gold and crimson, he placed a simple meal before her. She stared at the food, but her thoughts were far away. He watched her quietly, then said in a gentle voice, "Something is troubling you again." She wanted to deny it, to keep the fragile secret locked inside. But the warmth in his eyes broke her silence. With trembling lips, she whispered, "I think there is life within me." The words hung in the air like a forbidden prayer. For a long moment, the human said nothing. His gaze did not waver, yet she feared he would laugh, or worse, pity her. But instead, he spoke softly, "Then we must be certain." In the days that followed, their journey turned into a search for answers. Far from the palace and its cruel whispers, they saw healers from distant worlds, beings who had no reason to judge her past. Each examination brought her closer to a truth she could no longer deny. The signs were there, undeniable, and bright life was growing within her. Tears filled her eyes the first time she heard it confirmed. She had spent her whole life believing she was less, broken, unwanted. And now, in the most unexpected way, she carried the one thing she had been told was impossible. The human was beside her. When she wept, he did not tell her to stop, nor did he speak of duty or destiny. He only said, "This is not a curse, it is a gift." The princess felt hope for the first time. But hope was a fragile thing in a galaxy built on judgment. News traveled faster than light. Whispers reached ears that should never have heard them. Rumors began to circle in the outer courts of her father's palace. The infertile princess was carrying a child, and not just any child, one tied to a human. The thought shook the noble houses. Some scoffed, claiming it was a lie. Others whispered of scandal, of shame upon the king's line. But there were those who began to fear, for if it were true, then the impossible had happened, and the princess was no longer a symbol of weakness, but of change. The princess, however, thought not of politics or power. She thought only of the small secret within her, and the quiet safety she felt in the human's presence. Yet deep down, she knew this peace could not last forever. Her father would not ignore such whispers for long. His pride would demand answers. One night, as they camped beneath a sea of stars, the human asked her, "Are you afraid?" She looked at him, her eyes filled with both fear and wonder. "Yes," she admitted, "but not of the life inside me. I am afraid of what others will do when they find out." He reached for her hand and held it firmly. "Then we will face it together." The promise in his voice steadied her heart. For the first time, she was not alone with her secret. She had a companion, someone who saw her not as broken, not as useless, but as a woman carrying something greater than destiny itself. Still, in the distance, the storm was already gathering. The king had heard the rumors. His silence would not last, and when he moved, the galaxy would feel the weight of his anger. The silence of the royal palace did not last long. When the whispers reached the king, they struck him like a storm across calm waters. At first, he dismissed them, believing them to be foolish tales spread by jealous rivals. But when the same words came again and again, carried by advisors he trusted and spies he paid, his pride began to tremble. The daughter he had called empty, the daughter he had given away like a forgotten trinket, was now said to be carrying life, and not just any life, a child bound to a human. The king's court buzzed with restless voices. Some called it an insult to the royal line, others claimed it was impossible. A few, braver than the rest, whispered that it was not shame but a miracle. The king, however, heard only the echo of his own authority slipping away. If the rumors were true, it meant the healers had been wrong. It meant he had cast away his daughter in arrogance. And it meant that a human, a species he considered lesser, had given his family something he himself could not. Summons were sent across the stars. The princess and the human were ordered to return to the palace. The message was wrapped in royal formality, yet the weight of command was clear. Refusal was not an option. When the princess received it, her hands shook as she read the words. She remembered the cold halls, the judging stares, the way her father's voice had once cut through her like ice. For a moment, fear returned to her heart. The human read the summons and then looked at her calmly. "Do you wish to go?" he asked. She hesitated, unsure how to answer. To disobey her father would bring consequences, yet to return meant standing before the very people who had once declared her worthless. At last, she whispered, "I do not wish to face him, but if I must, I will not stand alone this time." The human simply nodded and said, "Then we go together." Their arrival at the palace was nothing like the day she had been given away. Then, she had been an object of pity, a gift offered with mocking pride. Now, eyes followed her with curiosity, suspicion, even awe. The court gathered in silence as she entered, the human walking beside her with steady steps. She felt her pulse race, but his presence calmed her enough to lift her chin and meet the gaze of those who had once mocked her. The king sat upon his throne, his face carved in stone. His voice filled the hall as he spoke. "Is it true?" The question was sharp, meant not only for his daughter, but for all who listened. The princess felt her breath catch, but she did not lower her eyes. With quiet strength, she answered, "Yes." The court erupted in gasps and murmurs. The king raised his hand for silence, his eyes burning into hers. "You dare claim such a thing? That after all these years, after every word spoken by my healers, you now carry life?" His disbelief was heavy, yet beneath it was something else, fear of what her answer meant for his pride. The princess stepped forward. Her voice was soft but unwavering. "I do not claim it, father. It is the truth." The hall fell silent again, as if the very walls were holding their breath. The king turned his gaze to the human. "And you, do you stand by this?" The human's voice was calm, steady, and unafraid. "I do. She carries life, and no denial can change that." The king's advisors began to argue among themselves. Some demanded proof, others spoke of tradition, and a few dared to suggest that the child could bring strength to the kingdom. The voices rose like waves crashing against each other, until the king silenced them once more. His face showed no emotion as he declared, "Then proof shall decide it. If what you say is true, then all will see, and if it is not, the shame will be yours to bear." The princess felt the weight of his words, yet she did not falter. She had spent her life bowed by shame, but this time she stood tall. She looked at the human beside her, and together they faced the court that had once dismissed her. Outside the palace walls, the news spread like fire through dry grass. The galaxy watched and waited. Was the princess truly carrying the impossible heir? Was the bond between human and alien more powerful than centuries of belief? No one knew what the test would reveal, but all knew one thing: the fate of the kingdom now rested within her. The palace was quiet that night, but not in the usual peaceful way. There was a tension in the air, a feeling that something big was about to happen. The alien princess sat by the tall glass window, her hands resting gently on her stomach, as if she was guarding a secret no one else could yet see. The human had been by her side every day since the revelation, and now their bond had grown into something deeper, something the entire kingdom could feel, but no one dared to speak aloud. The stars outside burned brighter, as if they were watching her, waiting for her to take the next step. The whispers in the corridors had turned into clear questions. What would happen if the princess truly carried life inside her? For her people, this was impossible. For the human, it was nothing short of a miracle. He stood behind her now, calm, but also protective, as if he knew the eyes of the kingdom were fixed on them both. She turned to him and whispered softly, "Do you feel it too? Like something inside me is awake, something my people thought I would never have?" The human nodded, but words failed him. He knew that whatever was happening was not just about her or him. It was about a future no one could have imagined. As dawn broke, the council demanded answers. The princess was called before them, and the human was asked to stand at her side. The council chamber was filled with long stares and unspoken doubts. "You claim what no one before has done," one elder said slowly. "We cannot believe without proof. The people need to know the truth." The princess lowered her head but then raised her eyes, stronger than ever before. "The truth is here," she said softly, her hand moving again to her stomach. "I may not yet show it, but I feel it every moment, and I will not hide it, not from you, not from my people." The human's presence gave her strength, but the council's silence was heavy. They did not cheer, nor did they scold. They only watched, as if waiting for fate itself to decide. That night, the princess sat once more by the window, looking at the stars, wondering what the future held. She knew that the days ahead would not be easy. There would be trials, doubts, and perhaps even heartbreak. But when the human placed his hand over hers, a calm washed over her. For the first time in her life, she felt not just like a ruler bound by duty, but like a woman with a future that was hers alone to shape. A small, almost invisible smile touched her lips. The impossible was no longer impossible. Something had begun, and no power in the galaxy could stop it now. The palace may have been quiet that night, but inside the hearts of two beings from different worlds, a storm of hope had already started, one that could either unite the galaxy or tear it apart. The days of quiet wonder had turned into days of deep change. The palace, once filled only with ceremony and heavy traditions, now carried laughter and whispers of hope. The princess, who once believed herself cursed and incomplete, walked through the halls with light in her steps. Her hand often rested gently on her belly, as if reminding herself that it was real, that the impossible had already begun inside her. Yet the galaxy beyond the palace walls did not share the same joy. To some, her miracle was a blessing. To others, it was a threat. The human stood by her side, often silent, but always steady. He did not claim to understand alien politics, but he understood her heart. When her eyes grew uncertain, he reminded her with a simple smile that they were in this together. The court looked at him differently now. Some bowed with new respect, others with suspicion. They whispered that he had broken rules older than empires, that he had touched what was forbidden, yet also that he had given their royal line something no one else could. One night, as stars drifted like silver dust outside the grand windows, the princess asked him softly, "Do you ever fear what comes next?" His answer was quiet but strong. "I fear only losing what we already found." She looked at him with warmth, yet also with the weight of destiny pressing against her chest. She knew the galaxy would not stay silent forever. Soon, emissaries from distant worlds began arriving. Some brought gifts wrapped in shining crystal, their voices filled with praise for the miracle. Others brought questions sharpened like hidden knives, asking how such a thing was possible and what it would mean for the balance of power. The human, unused to being the center of such attention, stood tall nonetheless. He spoke with honesty, never boasting, never hiding. And somehow that honesty disarmed even the sharpest of questions. But beneath the layers of respect and celebration, there were darker currents. Not everyone wanted this new future. Some feared it would change the bloodlines of their kind forever. Some feared humans themselves. If one man could do this, what else might humanity be capable of? Whispers spread, old prophecies were recalled, and ancient fears began to stir. The princess, though, refused to be shaken. She held the human's hand openly before the court. She spoke with a voice that had once been fragile, but now carried strength. She told her people that this was not the end of their line, but the beginning of a brighter path. She told them that life was a gift, no matter how unexpected its source. The hall grew silent, her words echoing like light through glass, and even those who doubted felt the truth sink into their hearts. Days turned into weeks, and her world changed more quickly than anyone could predict. The human found himself treated not only as a companion, but as something greater, a symbol. Children of the kingdom watched him with awe, as if he carried secrets from beyond the stars. Elders debated whether to honor him with new titles. The princess, however, cared less for titles and more for the simple truth that she was no longer alone. As her time grew nearer, the galaxy seemed to hold its breath. The air was thick with both hope and unease, yet the bond between her and the human never faltered. Each night, when doubts tried to creep in, they reminded each other of what they had already overcome. Their story had begun with loneliness, with the belief that nothing could change. Now it had become something far larger than themselves, a promise to their people, and perhaps even to the stars themselves. And so the final chapter of their journey began, not with fear, but with the quiet certainty that love had already reshaped destiny. Whatever awaited them beyond the horizon, they would face it together, hand in hand. As the galaxy watched in awe,